Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory has won.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Ransaw. Welcome to Civil Rights, Social Justice, and Education Then and Now. We have a great lineup for you. I'm trying to get Ambassador Young on the phone. We've had a little technical difficulties with the video, but I think I can get him on the phone. If you could hold on just a few seconds, let me see if I can catch him on the phone, and we will get things kicked off right away. Just 1 second. Hello, Ambassador Young. Hello, can you hear me? So this year we're working on a project where we're talking about the impact of civil rights and social justice on education and the impact that the work that you did with Dr. Green and everybody that you worked with in the past and today. And I just wondered, do you have any comments or any thoughts about the impact of the work that you did back in the day and how that's affecting things now?
Well, I tell you what, you can say the same thing. I mean, when you went to Michigan State, it was quite different than it is now.
Yes, sir.
And you didn't have Bob Green. I mean, you didn't have a Department of Urban Affairs I forget what they call it, but it is Urban Affairs. But he introduced that when he got there. And we brought him down south and taught him about the Mississippi, and he integrated what was going on in the north and south. Now that had not been done before 1968. See, and after Martin Luther King's death, the experiments that had been going on in a small scale, like Michigan State, began to go nationwide and system-wide. So there's a big difference. Now we have a kickback, or I guess you call it that, where down in Florida they're rebelling against being woke. They want everybody to stay asleep, and it just seems to me that education is about awakening. And awakening, if you're awakening people to the truth and to facts, that's different. And it's gone so far, but it hadn't really gone that far, but I think, this is my personal judgment, that it was mostly the inclusion of gay and lesbian issues that brought the the resistance, or the combination of the two. But for the most part, we've come a long way since the 60s.
Yes, sir.
And if you want to look at it in terms of cities, I mean, Atlanta was less than 1 million people in the 60s, and it's 7 million now, over 7 million. I mean, the Atlanta economy the Atlanta city economy is the same size as Norway, and so it's there's just all kinds of changes. I was with a group of 25 to 35-year-olds yesterday, and they paid $3,000 to come to a meeting. And I don't know where people didn't have that kind of money. That's all I paid for a year to go to college, was $3,000.
$3,000 for a year? Wow, okay.
In fact, my wife got her master's at Queens College in New York.
Sure.
And it didn't cost her $16 a semester. So for $32, she got a master's degree in education. And so there are all kinds of differences, but there were over 1,000 folk keeping up with them. I mean, that were in that conference.
Right, that's amazing.
And so I'm saying that everything is happening on a much larger scale now than it was 20 years ago. I mean, and you couldn't have put 1,000 people in a room 25 years ago, and I didn't know anybody. And these were 1,400 young people that could spend $3,000 on a conference. And the conference was on business and business development. And these were all business owners. And that was not one of the regular conferences that come to Atlanta, like the Urban League or the Operation Hope. This was something, these were mostly young people I had never met, never heard of. But I'm saying that's a qualitative and a quantitative difference between now and then.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Ted Ransaw, Michigan State University, Office of K-12 Outreach. We have an esteemed panel for you today. We will be talking about Sankofa and especially civil rights then and civil rights now. So we're connecting the past and the present to see where we are right now. So our guests, we have distinguished Professor Dr. Robert Green, distinguished Professor Dr. William Smith, and distinguished Professor Dr. Gary Orfield. Wow, what a huge mouthful. I must say I'm extremely excited. Dr. Orfield, I have met you once. You probably don't remember when you came to Michigan State University. You were lecturing at the law college. I had a short conversation with you. But before that, I have to say this honestly from the bottom of my heart. I've been following your work for as long as I can remember. I have probably gone to the Southern Poverty Law Center website at least 2 or 3 times a year since I first heard about it as in my master's program. So I am so thrilled to have you here. Dr. Smith, I have to tell you, this is something I haven't necessarily said to you out loud, but me having an office near your office, I have literally been walking in the hallway. You have said something about some current research. I had to turn around and go back and change and update what I was working on right away. I mean, just from what my IQ has been raised just by being around you and your staff and your office. This is a true story. I'm not blowing you up. I have learned so much from you and also from you, Dr. Orfield. Dr. Green, of course, we met in Las Vegas. I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to tell you how I met Dr. Green. Dr. Green was at a NAACP meeting in Las Vegas, and I was there to present some information. I was a hot new doctoral student. I had all my stuff. I'm reading my paper. This is this, this is that. And this guy was in the back would say, yeah, and also this. And I was like, yeah. And I was saying what I was saying, and he would say, yeah, but you know, and I was saying, he would say, oh, nope, that's wrong. Who is this old dude in this room? And I was like, oh, that's Dr. Green that used to work with Dr. King. I just put my paper on the table and just sat down. Right. So Dr. Green, that is how I'm. So Dr. Green came to my class. I was teaching a masculinity class in African and African American studies at UNLV. And Dr. Green was a guest speaker. He came in, he fired up the young men in my class to such a level. 2 weeks later, we had a mentorship program in a high school. We ran that program, I think 3.5, maybe 4 years. We wound up having we had 4 mentorship programs in 3 schools within 2 years after he left. And we had only met like 2 or 3 times before that. So all of you have directly informed my work personally, and I can't thank you enough. And I'm so excited to have you here. We also have another gentleman, Kevin Brooks. He used to be with Michigan State. He is now with Eastern Tennessee University. He's going to jump in and help us out.
Thank you, Dr. Ransom. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. It's an honor and a privilege to be with some of the members of the civil rights movement and the contributions that you all made. Dr. Green, Dr. Schmidt, Dr. Orfield, it's a delight to be in your presence and on this call. My name is Dr. Kevin L. Brooks. I am the director of the Mary V. Jordan Multicultural Center and Student Access and Success at East Tennessee State University. My connection to MSU is I was there for about 7 years as academic specialist in diversity and civic engagement at the Residential College in the Arts and Humanities. I recently transitioned here to ETSU for this role, but I still remember the important work that we did, Ted and I, in the college education, with me being in the Residential College in the Arts and Humanities, and the work that we do down at the Detroit Center. Is with gratitude that I have this opportunity to be with you all. My connection with Dr. Green is that I actually have a house in the neighborhood that he created history in East Lansing. I see the historic home that he lived in when he integrated housing in East Lansing. I also see the murals and the elementary school that is now named after him. So I want to say thank you for the contributions that you made to Black life in East Lansing and Greater Lansing in particular.
So Dr. Green, since you are the one person that knows everybody on the camera, I'm going to ask how you met each of these individuals. Just 1 minute, just tell me how you met Dr. Orfield and how you met Dr. Smith.
Okay. Bill Schmidt was brought to the College of Education when I had been there for a period of time. And we were all, when I say we, the faculty had heard that a very bright young man, knowledgeable about curriculum and so forth, would be joining the faculty. And you know how a lot of old faculty members are. They think that anybody young and new coming in can be a threat. I was happy to hear that Bill Schmidt, a curriculum expert, I had heard good things about him in terms of high expectations for all kids, that he would defend minority kids, poor kids, Black kids. So I was happy to meet Bill. But I had been at the college probably maybe 20 years or so before he came. But he was a welcome addition to the College of Education at Michigan State. And he came with a national reputation of being quite a scholar. Gary Orfield and I go back to the school desegregation days. And when I think of him, I think of Martin Luther King Jr. I think of other folk who were active in the movement. Gary was always seen by me and Peter Cohen. You remember Peter Cohen, Gary?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Gary was seen by all of us as a scholar. And excuse the expression, I'm gonna say it, a white scholar who could be trusted. Because, you know, Bob Greene and others, we were so race conscious and angry about conditions in the country and in our schools. The segregation of schools being an example of what was going on in the South. We knew all of that. So there weren't too many white scholars that were trusted. I'm just being blunt now. And Gary Orfield was one of those few young men that myself and Tom Atkins and others, we really respected and we really trusted. Gary Orfield would stick his neck out. He was not afraid or fearful about speaking out about discrimination. That's what I like about Gary. And Gary had a tough tongue. Tough tongue. By a tough tongue, I mean somebody who will say what they believe in and be prepared to back it up. So Gary was a scholar, but not only a scholar, Gary was a fighter for social justice. That's what I remember about Gary Orfield. And I always respected him. And I guess, Gary, all I can say is I'm happy to be on this program with you. Bill Schmidt, too. But Bill, you're a young man compared to Gary and I. Gary and I, we've been around a long time, and Gary and I worked together years ago with people like Nate Jones, Tom Atkins. These names may not mean much to you, but they mean a lot to Gary and myself. Okay, Bob Green, you talk to them.
Thank you, Dr. Green.
Okay,
That was a fantastic introduction. I appreciate you sharing the background about our esteemed guest. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So, opening question. In just a minute or two, if you have met Dr. King, how were you influenced by him, if you were?
Well, I was at Michigan State at the time, and the Black students at Michigan State came to me, and this is right around, I think around Black History Month, Ted, I'm not sure, wanted to do something, and they wanted a speaker to come that could help them raise money to run a project dealing with, now we call it social justice, in those days we call it civil rights. And Martin Luther King Jr.'s name came up. And I went to college with a young lady who knew him from Atlanta and had known him for a long period of time. She was a good friend of mine and my wife, and she said, look, I can get him on the phone. I know how to. I said, you can get Martin Luther King Jr. on the phone. Her name was Edwina Moss. And she said, yes. She got Secretary Dora McDonald on the phone, and we worked out a King visit to Michigan State. Martin Luther King Jr. agreed to come. He came. He spoke to a packed audience of maybe 4,000 to 5,000 auditoriums full of students. And it was really just a tremendous speech. And okay, I'm gonna back up. Ted, the nice thing about Orfield and Schmidt, I can tell them I made a mistake. That was not the first time. The first time I met, my memory is coming back. The first time I met Martin Luther King Jr., I was driving a yellow cab in San Francisco. That was one of the jobs. I got a job driving yellow cab after the NAACP boycotted yellow cab for not hiring Black drivers. And so I was driving my taxi, and I knew that Martin Luther King Jr. was going to be in town, and that he was going to speak at the NAACP's National Convention in San Francisco. And I knew what time he was about to speak. They were scheduled to speak. So yeah, this is the first time, I'm sure now. So what I did, Ted, I parked my cab behind the Civic Center in San Francisco. I think this was about 1954, 55. And I took off my yellow cab jacket. We wore cab jackets at the time. And I walked in as he was wrapping up his speech. And when I say wrapping it up, he was talking about fear. Don't be afraid, fight for justice. I mean, he was really at it. And people were jumping up, and, you know, to get excited about his talk. And I was just amazed. I sat there quietly and listened to him talk about overcoming fear, fighting for justice, not being afraid. And when he finished speaking, he said, I'm going to call on Sister Mahalia Jackson to sing for us, but she has a cold. She's not able to sing. So we'll just talk. She and they had a conversation, and I went up behind him and I tugged on his coat. He jumped and turned around. I said, you don't know me. I said, my name is Robert Green, and I would like to get to know you. He said, okay, bro. He called me Brother Green. I never forget. He said, well, Brother Green, I'll tell you what. Do you live here? I said, yeah, I live here, right here in San Francisco. He said, I will be speaking over in Berkeley, California in 2 weeks. I want you to come. So that was I did that 2 weeks, I showed up. That was my second time meeting Martin Luther King Jr. But again, I backed up. The first time I recall now very clearly that I met him was at the NAACP National Convention, 1955, San Francisco.
Wow, that's interesting. I met you at an NAACP event, and you also met Dr. King at an NAACP event. Dr. Orfield.
You know, I've only met Dr. King a couple of times just to say hello, shake his hand. But I followed him around a lot, especially when I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, and he was doing the Chicago Freedom Movement. He was giving talks in little black churches all over the South Side, the West Side. I would go listen, and it was very powerful. So I heard him speak many times there, and I heard him speak in Watts when I was doing some research in California shortly before the Watts riots. I heard him speak, of course, at the March on Washington, where I was a student intern. You know, I heard him speak many times and followed his actions, but I didn't really know him. I wish I had. When you met him, you know, until you heard him talk, you would look at him and you would think, oh, he's kind of short, he's a little heavy, he kind of moves a little slowly sometimes. But when he started talking, it was like a miracle. I remember many times hearing him talk in little churches late at night to very tired groups of people, starting out with Exodus, talking about the walls of Jericho, talking about the Declaration of Independence. The energy that happened between the people who were there and Dr. King was always just amazing, astonishing, something that, you know, I followed many, many famous people over my life. It was unique. It was incredible. You felt that he was always tired, but he gained strength. He drew from the energies and hopes of people, and he turned it on. He made them understand how their basic values related to what needed to be done. And he brought their religious values and their values about their society and their democracy and law all together in a way that was astonishing. I've been to the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta, and I've seen the notes for some of his speeches. And having heard some of those speeches, it's astonishing that we would have a few little sentences down on a pad and something completely eloquent and powerful and coherent and deeply, deeply emotional all came together from those few little notes. To me, it's something that's truly unique in American history. The kind of capacity to bring together the best of our religious and civic traditions, and especially in a time like this, when we're seeing the worst of those things brought together so often in such a powerful reactionary movement. It's just inspiring to remember those times.
Wow, thank you. So you mentioned that you had heard Dr. King when you were in Chicago, University of Chicago.
I
I get
also
the
met him when I was at the University of Minnesota. When I was
uh,
an undergrad, I was a student government leader, and he came to speak. And I met him briefly then as well. But the times that I really met him, I think, is when I was listening to him talking to and creating movement out of exhaustion, hope out of hopelessness.
well, thank you for that. So I'm from Chicago. I was born in '68, and so I gather University of Chicago was on fire at the time. Still is, but University of Chicago was on fire at the time. So I appreciate you sharing that. But I think there might be another gentleman here who's also from Chicago, Dr. Smith.
Yes, I am. I always, when asked where I'm from, say I'm a Chicago kid, and I mean Chicago kid, not a suburb. I grew up in the city on the west side. And so I share the experiences, and I went to the University of Chicago. I have never met him personally, Dr. Martin Luther King, but certainly living in Chicago, I became very aware of his speaking and found him to be such a powerful motivator in my own life and my own rethinking as I was growing up in graduate school to figure out where I would go, what I would do. And this is an experience that has driven me from the moment it happened to now, and that is I was in Chicago in graduate school at the university in 1968 when all of the bad things that happened and the city blew up, and I was going on the south side to my classes at the University of Chicago. And although I didn't meet him, but through that experience, that confluence of my life while I'm still being in graduate school, listening to him and then finding him being killed and having to face the reality of that in terms of the anger and frustration of so many people from the city, that it just stuck with me. And I think to this day, that was a turning point for me, because at Chicago, my PhD is in statistics. But when I finished and came to Michigan State that very next year, and that's when I met Bob Greene. I was a 23-year-old baby, scared to death of him and his friend Tom Gunnings, and thought myself, oh my gosh. But that whole experience sits in my heart and drives me to this day. And all the research that I do as I apply my statistical knowledge to large data sets to examine these issues about how all of this relates to schooling in America and what schooling does and does not do. So I never met him, but that experience, I can still to this day see myself in my car, dark, seeing fire and smoke as I was driving to the university and back home. So that memory will stay with me forever.
Dr. Schmidt, do you have any additional thoughts about the relationship among civil rights, social justice, and education?
Yes, one of the things that I have learned through the research that I've done is that one of the very elementary, I think Dr. Martin Luther King said, civil rights is an educational battleground. And I've learned over time that, you know, when we look at data and we look at the performance of students in schooling, one of the things we always identify is that the home and family background, social class, if you will, and racial identity are factors that influence the performance of students. I've done these studies internationally, worldwide. And what we found recently, which I think is so very important, is that the schools themselves contribute to this inequality in varying percentages across countries. And what I mean by that is that, yes, home and family background do influence student performance. The area I work in is mathematics, and it influences that performance. But there is another way in which social class and background enter the situation, and that is that the schools do not allocate the opportunities for students to learn equally across these groups. In other words, the schools themselves contribute to the inequalities that we see in performance among Black kids, white kids, low SES kids, rich kids. That is one of the most telling elements, because schools are designed to be the equating factor, to provide the background for those that don't have it from the home, to give all a chance, the great American dream. But I am telling you, it is a false notion that that dream exists. The schools themselves create huge amounts of inequality because all kids do not get the same opportunities. And that in the United States, that inequality is about 1/3 of the total inequality in mathematics performance. Think about that. 1/3 of the inequality comes because schools treat children of different SES and racial backgrounds differently and give them different opportunities to learn. To me, that's one of the most compelling, important factors. Dr. King did not have data at that point to make that point, but that is the point he was making when he said education is the battleground for civil rights, for human decency, and the schools are failing, and these about are fairly recent. So this is the reality still out there.
Again, every time you say something, I feel like I need to take notes. Dr. Orfield, any response to Dr. Smith, or any thoughts, follow-up thoughts about civil rights, education, and poverty, sir?
You know, we've been doing studies monitoring the degree to which the country's been realizing the goal of the Brown decision, really since the 1970s. And it's been a story of what were huge gains under the Civil Rights Act being dissipated and then reversed by the United States Supreme Court, and as it abolished the rights that were created in that period. When I was in graduate school at Chicago, one of my professors was John Hope Franklin, and he talked about the way in which after the Reconstruction, the rights were eliminated. Nobody cared about them. Even back then, I resolved that somebody was going to care about them if this happened again. And it was already signs that it was beginning to happen again, even by the late 1960s. So we've done that, and we've shown the systematic increase in opportunity that took place during the Civil Rights Revolution, and the dismantling that took place, particularly in the 1990s and since, with a steady increase of segregation. And we've tried to point out constantly that race and class aren't really separate things in schools. the schools that are segregated African American or Latino schools are also segregated by poverty, isolation from the middle class. So the students are growing up in isolation from the mainstream of the society. They're growing up in schools that have unequally prepared teachers. They're growing up in schools that have peer groups that are experiencing all the problems of poverty. They're growing up in unstable communities because poverty means unstable housing and unreliable future. And it means untreated health problems and so forth. So all of these things are concentrated in these segregated schools. And we've stopped trying to do anything about them.
Yeah.
We kind of created other theories. And since the 1980s, we've been really living in a world that says it doesn't matter what the social condition of schools are. We can just test and hold people accountable and force them to improve. That was the Reagan strategy. And if that doesn't work, we can just kind of dissolve the public schools and create alternative schools through charters or through vouchers. That's been the driving force of education policy for the longest time. One of the things I think is really important for people to think about is the real agenda of the civil rights movement. It came out of Dr. King's struggle, really ruled the country only for a few years, from the time of the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and to the arrival of the Nixon administration and the end of the Warren Supreme Court. That brought us to a period of long-term struggle, of decades of struggle that Bob Greene was very involved in, and NAACP was very involved in, to try to hold the line to preserve going backwards. And then by the time of the Reagan administration, trying to deal with a court that was comprehensively hostile, and a government and even educational leaders that have forgotten most of what Dr. King was working for. And we're constantly surfacing the idea that they had an alternative solution, which never turned out to work very well because it didn't address the underlying issues of the profound social, community, economic inequality that relates to race in our society.
The other thing, too, Gary.
Yes, sir, Dr. Green. I was gonna say your turn. So yes, sir. Please continue.
Gary, that we focused on years ago was the expectation level. And I later on, that became my major research area, high expectations for student achievement. Because when I came along as a youngster, teachers did not believe that students of color, young people of color, could read or even learn to read as well as their white counterparts. We were seen as educationally inferior. And Dr. King talked a lot about that. And he was a firm believer in the power of education. And Dr. King used to say, give us a chance to read. Give us a chance to go to school. Upgrade those schools. And our kids will do as well as anybody else. So I always felt that Martin Luther King Jr., for me, more than anybody else, pushed the notion of high expectations and its impact on student achievement. That was a big factor. And he talked about that a lot. And I tell young people, they often don't realize that King was such a pusher on education that he was always ahead of his classmates. Martin Luther King Jr. finished high school, what was it, Ted, at 15 or 16 years of age, PhD at 26 or 27. But King never allowed that to puff him up, as we would say, to say, I'm so smart that only I can do this. King used to always talk about the power of education. I can hear this voice. The power of education. If you get a good education, King used to say, no one can take it from you. And my parents felt that that way. And so high expectations was a factor that I focused on later on in my academic career. Ted, you know this from my work at Michigan State, in Nevada, that believing that young people can learn and establishing a pathway by which they will learn is the key. And when you have low expectations, kids don't do well. I never will forget, I was at an elementary school in Las Vegas, sitting, and I would very often go and sit in classrooms and just listen to the dialogue between the kids and the teachers. And this little boy, he was a second grader. He was very active and busy. And the teacher said, "You are going to grow up just like your dad." And I looked, "You're going to end up in prison just like your dad." And so I interrupted in a very polite way. You know, these were maybe, I was at Matt Kelly Elementary School, so it might have been maybe second or third graders. I said, with a smile on my face, "That doesn't have to happen." So I put my arm around the boy and I said, "I want you to listen to the good things," I would stress good, "the good things that your teacher has to say about learning. Read your books, look at what's in your books, and you will do well." So it was always a struggle to make sure that, from my standpoint, that teachers would hold or learn to hold high expectations for minority student success, especially Black males. Ted, that's why I'm so proud of what you're doing now, even at Michigan State today. The work you're doing with Black males is phenomenal, because you never know who's going to be a star. Always, you don't know who's going to be a star. Give them a chance, push them. And so high expectations is another component of education that I think we need to stress more. Stress the notion that all, even today, in my old age, when I go out and visit schools once in a while, I still talk about the need to push kids in the area of high expectations and let them know they can succeed. Because even today, we know, Gary, we have, like you have schools in Chicago today still. We have schools in places like Las Vegas that are very poor. Kids don't get the kind of support that we know they need from parents. Not that parents are mean, they don't know. Some of them didn't have a chance. So again, coming back to my point, high expectations is related to student success, and we need to continue to push that notion in our schools today.
Thank you. Kevin?
I would say a couple of things. One of them is the Black colleges of the South, of course, were the seedbed of so much of the civil rights movement, especially with the sit-in movement, the initial freedom rides, and so on and so forth. It was a trigger for so many things. In terms of what students can do today, students don't even have very much understanding of the history of the struggle and the difference that it can make. So both what students can do and how students can be turned on by what professors and others can do to inform them are important. We've worked this last year with a group of teenagers around New York City that are protesting the inequality and the fact that students of color and Black and Latino students in New York aren't getting into the selective high schools and so forth. The students have been really active in kind of putting that issue on the agenda. But I don't see very much student activity, student mobilization around issues of civil rights in general. And I think part of the problem is a lot of the people, a lot of the older people in the society have kind of given up. And we need to think about how to trigger a movement the way that the Black students in colleges like East Tennessee and all over the South kind of triggered the changes, big social changes that took place in the 1960s. It's not happening on any large scale now. When it does happen, like these groups in New York, it gets attention, and people can challenge the conscience of the broader society. We need a big movement. It's obvious we're in a period of reversals, and there are huge inequalities that are being more and more deeply embedded in the society. And young people are often leaders in those kinds of changes. So some of us who are older need to communicate with younger people about what difference their action can make.
Yeah.
What kinds of inequalities they can address, how they aren't powerless, and to support them. Just like some of the professors in the Black colleges of the South supported the student movement, and it's considerable risk to their own jobs back then.
I guess, Ted, looking at your questions, I was telling my wife the other night, I'm still amazed and impressed with how young Black kids struggled fearlessly for civil rights years ago. And we got to keep that in mind, that we came through a period in which students were not afraid. I have some notes here. I remember I was on a bus, Gary, in Cleveland, Ohio, I believe it was. Oh, yes, it was. It was when Black kids were being bused, first being bused to predominantly white schools. The NAACP, Tom Atkins, insisted that there be at least one adult on every bus with the kids on it going into these very hostile school communities in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was telling my wife the other night, thinking about this program, I was on a bus with about 35 Black students. They were singing, clapping their hands. They had already been in school. They knew they were going into a hostile environment, predominantly white, to integrate the schools. But they were singing, "We shall overcome." They were clapping and just smiling. There was no fear. And those kids played a key role in integrating the schools in sections outside of Cleveland, like Shaker Heights, the well-to-do suburban areas. So I sometimes say we need to remember the days in which these kids were so fearless. Coming back to my notes, and the one thing that I think Dr. King did for us, all of us, Gary, Black, white, young, old, that no other civil rights leader was able to do and accomplish. King taught us not to be afraid. He taught us how to overcome fear. And overcoming fear is very essential in promoting and producing social change and struggling for the right thing. My father was a very, in a way, kind of fearful man. He was fearful in a sense that he would always say, I want my boys to be okay, the 5 boys, not to get hurt, to be okay. And one day I took my dad shopping. I bought him a top coat, and we came home, and I was living in Detroit then years ago. I said, "Dad, tell me something that you never told anybody else that you are aware of that's related to social justice." I said, I might use another term. And he said, "Oh boy, I don't remember anything." I said, oh, Dad, yes. I said, you're not getting off that easy. Tell me something that created fear in your life and created fear in the lives of so many other blacks. He dropped his head, and Gary Orfield, my dad, said to me, Bob, when I was 14 years of age, I saw my best friend lynched. I saw him hung from a tree. And I kind of dropped my head. I said, Dad, what did he do? This was in the Stacey Abrams territory, Jones County, Georgia. That's where Stacey Abrams grew up. My dad grew up in the same area that Stacey Abrams grew up in. I said, what did he do? My dad looked at me, he dropped his head. He said, he didn't do anything. He said, occasionally, in that area where Stacey Abrams is fighting right now, Jones County, Georgia, my dad said whites would occasionally lynch a black to keep other blacks in line. And he said that produced fear. He said, we're always afraid. My father said, when I saw the lynching of one of my best friends hung from a tree when I was 14 years of age, he said that was enough to keep me in line. So coming back to kids nowadays and social justice, we need to let young people know that things happen that parents never talked about. My father, oh, I know, this is the key, Gary. My dad, when my dad told me about the lynching that he saw when he was 14 years of age and his buddy was hung from a tree because they say he didn't get out of the path of a white man fast enough. I said, Dad, I became indignant politely. I said, Dad, why didn't you tell me that when I was a kid? Why are you just now telling me that story? My father looked at me, you know what he said, Gary? He said, I did not want you to grow up hating white people. I wanted you to grow up knowing that there are some good white people, there are some bad white people, and you need those good ones on your side. So again, I reflect on these young kids today at the Matt Kelly schools in Las Vegas, and we need to let them know, don't be afraid, but don't be a bully either, but don't be afraid to speak up and do the right thing. Even though you're only 8, 9, 10 years of age, you can still do the right thing, and you don't have to be afraid for doing the right thing. So anyway, Ted, your topic brought just up a lot of memories for me, but I guess as late as several months ago, longer than that, a year or so ago, when I was in Las Vegas talking with elementary kids about doing the right thing, studying, reading, you know, I always push reading. I always focus on the fact that some of these kids are going to do well. All they need is a chance, and we need to hold high expectations for them. So anyway, Ted, thank you for, you know, providing me with the opportunity to just share these things with my colleagues, especially Gary Orfield. I haven't known Kevin Brooks very long, but Kevin, that's all right, you're a young man. I've known Gary Orfield for 6 years and Bill Schmidt for about maybe 40 years. And you look like you're only about 22 years old, so you don't remember any of this. Okay, enough talking.
You know, one thing that I remember very well about Bob Green is I remember going to his house in Michigan, in East Lansing, and seeing this remarkable group of young Black students who are preparing to be education leaders all over Michigan, and thinking, what difference one person can make. One person who's got a vision and a commitment and cares about the students and thinks of them not just as audience, but as the future. That was such an impressive visit for me, Bob. I think that's the first time I ever really talked to you seriously. But just to see what you had created and what kind of power that was creating for the future of the schools in Michigan and elsewhere. That was a powerful experience.
Well,
And I
thank
do
you,
think
Gary. Thank you.
Well,
individual,
I came in to work on a Sunday. I saw Dr. Smith working on a Sunday for a class on Monday, right? So Dr. Smith has a really good background with supporting the next generation of kids, next generation of students going out and changing the world. Kevin, did you have another question for Dr. Smith?
Would you all discuss the role that East Tennessee played during the civil rights movement? And would you share with students any strategies that you recommend that would deepen their commitment to civil rights, social justice, and community engagement?
I have not had any connections with East Tennessee, so I would have nothing to add to that. But one thing I might like to add, given the communality of the city of Chicago, I recently did an experimental study for the Art Institute, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And they talking about, Bob, the influence that public organizations can have on the lives of kids is they set up a program where they took kids from the Chicago public schools system, minorities, low SES kids, and they invited them to be part of a special 3-year preparation program. They went on weekends to the Art Institute for training in art, okay? And I don't know if you know this, but the historical Black schools have been cutting down on their art programs, only recently recognizing that was a mistake and now wanting to have and encourage more of that. Well, the Art Institute in Chicago took these kids, put them through this program, and they asked me to do as sort of, I think just because I'm a Chicagoan, but anyway, they asked me to do a study of that program, an actual rigorous experimental study. And what I found is phenomenal. That program has, when these kids coming from the lower social class, where only about 14% by census figures ever go on to any college, 80 some percent of the kids in this program all went on to prestigious universities for their college education. So what you were talking about does work. You give these kids the opportunities like the Art Institute did, and wow, what an impact. I've never seen such a remarkable large effect statistically from a study of that sort. They took these kids and they're now in college. Almost, what is it, 90 some percent went on to some form of post-secondary, but 80% went on to places like the University of Chicago, University of Michigan, Michigan State. These were not, low-level universities where they went on to. So this shows what can happen. And I think the push of the Art Institute program in this study, when it was finished and reported to them, the foundation that funds this has now started such a program in San Francisco and Baltimore and is spreading across the country. These are the kind of things I think we need to really help encourage where the public institutions like Art Institutes things of that sort, to step in and try to help and contribute. And the Museum of Science and Industry also did a similar set of study regarding the teachers. And so there is work going on that I think is really central to your point, is give these kids a belief and a chance that they can do it. And they can, and they will, and they did. And that was really established in a real publishable journal article. So it's, nobody can say, well, this is not true. It is true. The data support this. And I think these are the kind of efforts that need to keep occurring to accomplish what you're just talking about.
Thank you all for your responses. I believe overcoming fear, finding issues that you are passionate about, and mobilizing and engaging the arts and culture are useful tools in deepening students' commitment to civil rights, community engagement, and social responsibility. I'm grateful for your answers. Thank you for your insights, and I'll turn it over to Ted to close us out.
Well, I wish we could talk forever. Every time I talk to one of you individually, I always learn so much. But you guys may have some other things you might want to do sometime today. So I'll let each of you provide any closing remarks or any additional thoughts that you would like to share. And then I'm going to ask you one curveball question, but I'll let you do any wrap ups before I give you the curveball. It's the easy curveball. Don't worry about it.
I'll tell you one thing, Ted. I would like to publicly say that one of the people that had a powerful influence on this 23-year-old when he stepped into Michigan State University was Bob Greene, that he probably doesn't know the impact that he had on my life, because he often occurs to me when I think about and get frustrated with some of the things. And I have devoted all of my statistical training from the University of Chicago right now around issues pertaining to these inequalities that exist and how schooling needs to improve to simply help the issue, not make it worse. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. It has been a pleasure working with you over the years. And you never knew this, but faculty members at Michigan State College of Ed were intimidated by you. You know why?
No.
You're highly intelligent and smart. And they would take on about Bob Greene, he's just woofing. He, blah, blah, blah. But when your name came up on an issue related to social justice, people listened. So I wanted you to know, I was not intimidated by you because I knew you were a good guy. But a lot of those colleagues over in the College of Education, they were, Bill, Gary Orville, I want you to know they were really intimidated by this man. You know why? Because he knew numbers, he could count. They couldn't count, they didn't know numbers. And he was not afraid. You were not afraid to speak out. So I love you, brother. And thank you for what you did for me and other minorities at Michigan State years ago.
Love you back.
Dr. Orfield.
Well, I think this is a wonderful experience, and I think it has lessons for what we do next. For example, one of the things that we're not doing is we're not teaching young people about how young people changed the world previously and how they can do it again. We're giving them the tools about the structure of inequality that they need to address. Either the vision of a possibility of better times or understanding of the structure of inequality that they're confronting and why they haven't been given fair chances and who's responsible. Those are things that can be done in universities. They can be done in the media. Mm-hmm. We need to escape the miasma of the paralysis of analysis that goes on and think about possibilities of transformation. That's what Dr. King did in virtually impossible situations, and actually managed to bring people the energy to change them and to support them and to give them a structure of thought that helps them understand what needed to be changed, and to empower them to go into politics and demand that the system open up.
Yeah.
We don't have much of that right now, and it's important kind of to connect the memories of people who've lived in those struggles to the young people who have to carry them on if we're going to succeed.
All right, so here's my curveball question. Thank you, by the way, Dr. Urfield. Thank all of you on the panel. As I said, I've been heavily influenced by all of you. I'm so excited. It's really hard for me to focus on, making sure that this is a show. I want to talk to you guys for the rest of the day. But here's my curveball question. How would you explain civil rights and why it's important today to a third grader?
Repeat that last part of that question, Ted.
This is for the entire group. Take turns, please. Explain civil rights and why it's important to today's third grader, right? Trying to take all the information that we shared today, what civil rights are and why they're important, in a way that some of our younger people in elementary school can understand. And I did say it was a curveball question.
I think that, you have to, for little kids, thinking about my own kids' lives, you have to help them notice things around themselves and think about whether it's fair, or whether the little kids don't know that they're supposed to treat people differently on the basis of their appearance or their social class, but it's going to be all around them as they grow up. Helping them understand when they see something that's unfair, why it exists, what we have to do to make things more fair. Kids have values that can be activated, and consciousness that they can notice things. We want to consciously give them connections with others that they might not have in their neighborhood naturally. Mm-hmm. That's important to learn those skills, the skills of interracial success and the lack of stereotypes. They are learned early, and they're going to face an intense dose of them when they get to be adolescents. So it's important to think about that even in early child development.
Yeah.
I actually would have much the same. I was thinking kids that age already have some sense of what's fair, and I would try to build on that in their lives. And also the other thing I would emphasize is to trust their heart, to begin to think humanity in a humane sense in looking at issues and problems. I think we too often don't recognize how important that is to just be sensitive to other people and their feelings.
Yeah, that's so important. Kevin Brooks, you're young, but you're out there struggling to do the right thing. And I recall when I was young at Michigan State, it was pretty tough because there were faculty members at the university, unfortunately, predominantly white, who didn't believe that we belonged there. And Bill Schmidt, I got a lot of my strength from people like Gary Orfield, who was out at other universities, who would say to me, Bob Green, what you're doing at Michigan State is good. That's Gary, that's why I always brought you and others in to Michigan State to visit. I wanted you to educate people who were your color. And you did, Gary. Gary, you really may not know the impact that you would have on the faculty in a college of education, so to speak, when I would bring a Gary Orfield up to Michigan State to speak. So they would say things that, Ted, that I would say, and people would dismiss. Oh, Bob Green, that's Bob Green. But when a Bill Schmidt or Gary Orfield would echo the same thing in a very intellectual, just way, just J-U-S-T, and they would do it, and they would do it, they would do it with no anger. Shut this thing off. So I just want to say, as we wind up, Gary, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Bill Schmidt, because you were people that I trusted. I trusted you, Gary. And
Likewise.
I trusted Bill Schmidt because there were people in the College of Education, and I'm not saying this from a racial standpoint, maybe I am, whom I didn't trust. Because my struggle always, Kevin, was to get Black students into Michigan State and get them out with a sense of sanity, in and out and sane, and prepared to do the right thing for people who are poor, not just in Michigan, but throughout the country. So, Gary, I want to thank you and Bill Schmidt for being the guys that you were. And I've never really said this, but you allowed me to understand that this struggle is not just a Black struggle, which sometimes I saw it as a Black struggle, but it was a struggle that we were all involved in, seeking to do the right thing. And Gary, you were out there. I mean, you're amazing, Gary. You in those days, you were a legend among Blacks. You want to know, this guy, Gary Orfield, who is he? This guy from Harvard. You were at Harvard, then you left Harvard. You were at Harvard. Is that where I met you, Gary?
Oh, I think that we probably met when I was at Illinois or at
Maybe, okay. But you were seen as a good person, and we knew we could seek you out and get the right kind of help. Ted Ransall, thank you for this program and bringing me together with two of my old buddies, Bill Schmidt and Gary Orfield, and Kevin Brooks. Best wishes to you. And let your students know that we believe in them and that they can and will succeed with the support of good people like you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I can't thank you enough. Once again, Michigan State University, K-12 outreach. Kevin, please give us the your university tagline as well, sir.
This has been great. I really enjoyed the conversations that we've had. And I think the students here in the Multicultural Center at East Tennessee State University would appreciate and be able to implement some of the things that you've shared with us, and look forward to working with you all again soon.